went to Alaska. My father had done a story on the Tongass National Rainforest, which is this rainforest in southeast Alaska. And there were these pictures of these beautiful fjords. So, out of high school, I got a sleeping bag and went to Alaska. Worked there for the summers as a commercial fisherman, much to the dismay of my father. Which, of course, when my son was born, I called him and apologized for that portion of my life. Moments after my son was born, trying to help fate not just repay me in my sins, right? So I was a commercial fisherman and working in the most natural environment that exists, that's left on the planet. And I worked for a skipper who had been a rancher's kid in LA and used to ride his horse to the beach every morning and not cross a fence. And his ranch was near the top of the Hollywood Hills sign. So this old timer, I began to see, coming from New York City, from Manhattan, in Alaska, with a name like Jonah, was I began to see kind of what our impact is on the planet, which instantly put me as a fringe environmentalist, right? I was coming back to the East Coast to go to school, college. The last one I was at was Vassar. And at the same time became a fishmonger because I didn't want this rainforest to be clear-cut. So to keep these small fishermen alive was my goal. So I started a business selling fish, which was wild seafood, which wasn't popular at the time, like it is now, called branding wild seafood. I then transitioned because I had used all my working capital in fish. I couldn't, it was put in the New York Times, and then I got a lot of pressure on the existing mafia in New York that controlled the fish market, who knew about all my restaurants that I sold to via the article in the Times. So they kind of put me out of business, and I needed to find a new job. And I just kept on asking myself, what do I know? So at this point I know fish, I know Alaska, and I also knew how to work on boats, because working in Alaska I worked on wood boats and learned how to repair them. So I started a company called Green Apple Design, think of that, in 1994 in New York City, doing high-end interior, environmentally sustainable interiors, which put me on the other fringe, right? I just did very good work for very rich customers in Manhattan, doing construction, but my only hang-up was that I only used sustainable materials. I had this business as a corporation for many years. Went out of business. I ended up having lots of issues. I married my bookkeeper, and it got really messy when she left me because I ended up having owed a lot more taxes than I even knew about. So I had to put that business down. And I'm a programmer, doing access databases, and because that was a cheap thing to do. I could get it at the time in the late 90s, I could get a computer, a laptop, and some software and train up in Visual Basic. I then missed building tremendously. Came to Boston. Did a lot more work in my architecture degree, but had a child, which is the one I apologized about. My new wife, my second wife, and had to make a living. So ended up and found out that architects make very little money. So I somehow found my way into becoming a union carpenter. and was able to work on some of my favorite architects' new construction and see some of Geary's construction details and learn heavy concrete, part of my maturing into architecture. At the same time, I'm also a plumber. So I'm a carpenter, a plumber, and a gas fitter. And the whole time I've had this green slant. So it wasn't until a couple of years ago that, so I found the Carpenters Union frustratingly white and old school, coming from New York City, in a very integrated neighborhood. So I worked with low-income, at-risk youth in Roxbury, training, doing job creation, and building super energy efficient housing. So I have some of the lowest energy consuming buildings in the state. We're all affordable housing, first-time home ownership, with punks from the ghetto who didn't know how to use a hammer. When we built this work, I used my credentials to get bank loans and created very energy efficient low-income housing, and then trained my students up. Which my students ended up doing so well, I ended up getting audited, they were audited by the Department of Labor because they've become middle class. I mean, how does somebody come out of jail and then 2 years later earn $65,000 a year? Like, how does that happen? Who created, why did, they thought they were lying. It couldn't be. So during this Washington, I used funds from the federal government during my job training. They ended up identifying this unique focus that I brought to my students that ended up creating their prosperity. And I've been writing a lot of curriculum for the Department of Labor and training teachers nationally. Furthermore, I have a business called Clean and Smart, which we've done quite a few solar installations, both solar photovoltaic, solar hot water, and retrofit work. And as a plumber, I've done high efficiency gas systems, combined solar systems. I hope I don't sound like one of these lunatics that's in the subway ranting, because I know that's why I was a little bit hesitant when you asked me about the careers and my transition. But it's really been a constant transition. It hasn't really stopped. It's been, I've never felt comfortable with my responsibilities, being able to meet them. I've always been transitioning to try and make ends meet, and seeing where opportunities are. And in that, installed Cambridge's first wind turbine. Found out there were no opportunities installing micro wind. Doesn't work. I installed a solar thermal system in Harvard Square, and a restaurant called the Red House, and Charlie's Kitchen. Did a combined solar array. Found out that worked quite well. It made them saved them a lot of money. I ended up in a venture capital magazine for a solar array of electricity that stores energy in batteries and sells to the grid. There are lots of opportunities in solar, by the way, for aggregating rooftops, for any of you. But large rooftops, we need acres.